much, Angela, and good morning, everyone. My name is Carol Clancy. I'm the Pennsylvania Bureau Director of Special Education, and it is my honor to welcome you to the 2022 Patent Literacy Symposium. We know how critical literacy abilities are to participate fully in society and the workplace in 2022. We also know that many citizens continue to struggle to possess those level literacy skills to participate fully in those settings. In fact, according to the National Council on Teachers of English Standards for English Language Arts, a very small percentage of our population possesses all of those necessary skills. The goal of this literacy symposium is to address this problem by offering the latest evidence-informed literacy research and its related instructional practices. With over 4,000 attendees here right now today, we are determined in Pennsylvania to be cohesive to make a difference across the Commonwealth. So I thank you for attending today and doing your part. The symposium includes presentations from the world's most respected researchers and practitioners who are translating research to practice each day in Pennsylvania classrooms, resulting in significant learning gains for all students. With over 75 sessions with focused strands to include equity, leadership, writing, word recognition, oral language, secondary literacy, MTSS, and the implementation science, the symposium's breadth and depth is certain to enhance the knowledge and practice of all who attend. So thank you so much for joining us today and enjoy your day.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Pam Kastner, and it is my honor to serve as Patent State Lead for Literacy. Before we launch our symposium, I'd like to thank Carol Clancy for her leadership at the Bureau of Special Education, our patent directors, and most importantly, our support team. We want to extend our sincere gratitude to our amazing program assistants, especially Kelly Kapp, and to our spectacular tech team. Each day of the symposium, before our keynote speaker, we will introduce you to patent literacy team members who, without their tireless work, dedication, expertise, this literacy symposium with over 4,300 participants and 75 literacy sessions of the world's most respected literacy leaders and dynamic practitioners would not be possible. Today, let's welcome and meet the patent literacy team from the central office in Harrisburg. Let's start with there you go, Dr. Jenny Alexander, you can unmute.
Hi, my name is Jenny Alexandri, and I've been a part of the literacy team for about 5 or 6 years now. And I'm so excited to be here. We have such amazing presenters, and we'll be getting such valuable and incredible information from these people. So thank you so much for coming and joining us. And we're excited to be here.
Good morning. I'm Karen Brady from the central office, and I'm so glad to be here to support all of you. And thank you all for coming.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Stacy Cherney, and I am from the Central Office Patent Team, and I'm happy to support you over the next couple of days. Welcome.
Good morning. I am Maggie Serpolowski. Once again, I am excited to be here with everyone today and the next 2 days, actually.
Good morning. I'm Karen Jerry. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for joining us. Looking forward to learning over the next 3 days with all of you.
And now, thank you, literacy team from central office. And now let's get this literacy celebration started. And
sorry, Pam. Good morning. I'm Nicole Kopka from the central office, and I'm excited to be here with you and support you over the next 3 days. Thank you so much for coming.
Sorry, Nicole. I think our excitement just got too much there. All right. And now let's get this literacy celebration started. And who better to launch our symposium than Dr. Louisa Moats. Dr. Louisa Moats has been a longtime partner of Patent, and we are forever grateful to her for all she has taught us and all she continues to teach us. So without further ado, Dr. Moats and her keynote address, what do phonemes have to do with it?
Hello, everyone. I'm so pleased to be able to participate in yet another wonderful conference put together by the Patent leadership. I commend all of you who've been doing this essential work in teaching reading over the past year and into the future. The topic I've chosen for my keynote is an old topic that's gotten new life in the last year or two because we've had some rather, I would say, vociferous voices on social media in particular, but also in some publications, questioning whether or not we should be teaching phoneme awareness, how we should be teaching phoneme awareness, whether it's distinct from phonics, whether it's appropriate and necessary for older students. And there's been a debate that has been unsettling, not only for practitioners in the field, but also for those of us who've been working in the research community and in the practitioner community for decades. So my talk is titled, "What do phonemes have to do with it?" Meaning, what does this have to do with teaching reading and spelling and vocabulary? So I thought I'd go over some of the basics, including what is a phoneme and why is attainment of phoneme awareness challenging even for adults? How does phoneme awareness differ from phonics? What is the goal of phoneme awareness instruction? And what do we know about instruction from research and practice? I'd like to acknowledge before I launch into the content that the content of this talk has been shaped by a co-authored paper I've been working on with Jane Ashby, Lucy Hart-Paulson, Marion McBride, Shira Niftel, David Kilpatrick, and myself, and that will be made available to all of you, I'm hoping, before too long. So let's start with this. At the Haskins Laboratories at Yale University, where the original work occurred in the actually early 1970s into the 1980s on the relationship between speech and print, the key, the leading researchers at that institution stated this: as a consequence of their multiple studies, the most powerful predictors of later reading and writing skills turned out to be those requiring phonological awareness, specifically the analytic ability to manipulate phonemes in words. So what I'm going to be talking to you about today is not news. It's not new news. It's old news, but somehow or other, over several decades, some of the key findings about the speech to print relationship have been lost in the shuffle, and we need to bring them back into focus. Let me remind everyone of something most of you are very aware of, and that is when we talk about building the architecture of a reading brain, we're talking about teaching the left cerebral hemisphere primarily to connect areas of the brain that are specialized for different aspects of language processing, including those that are specialized for phonological processing, those that are specialized or become specialized for orthographic memory, the word form area, those that are specialized for connecting graphemic images with phonemes, and those that are specialized for making sense of the words that we have identified. And this is illustrated. This is a slide that Jack Fletcher gave me from the University of Texas, Houston many years ago. One of their studies using imaging on a 7th grader who was a very poor reader. And we should look at the left hemisphere here primarily, but the left hemisphere of this young person, you can see, was activating areas in the phonological processing system, trying to activate the word form area or orthographic processing system, and was not able to show or didn't show much activation in the area in which phonemes and graphemes become connected and then connected with meaning. But after remediation, of intensive remediation, in which the connections between speech and print, specifically phonemes and graphemes, was emphasized, the brain activation patterns were very different. First of all, there was much more activation here as a consequence of pathways being built to connect these key areas and to connect the speech to print association area with the meaning-making capacities of the brain in the left temporal lobe specifically. But meaning-making, I also have to add, in general, when we're talking about text reading, does involve the entire brain. There was also, in this young person, less attempt to compensate for the lack of left hemisphere activation with right hemisphere activation as basic reading processes were gained. So what's going on here? What is the role of phonology in learning to read and spell? Well, Dave Kilpatrick has done a wonderful job describing this process, relying heavily on Linnea Erie and David Scher in particular, because over many decades they have built coherent theories of word recognition and the nature of this orthographic process that must go on for us to be able to read printed words. But one of the main points that he and others make is that even if a word is somewhat irregular, we still go through the same process of mapping phonemes to graphemes. So if we're learning to read a word like red, which is perfectly regular, if we have the word in our vocabulary, we need to break it down into its component phonemes to match those phonemes to the letters. The same process occurs even if there's a somewhat less direct relationship between the sounds of a word like has, where the last sound is z, but it's represented with s, and kids have to learn that and develop a set for diversity in understanding phoneme grapheme correspondences. And it even is the same with so-called sight words like have, which we have in the past treated as totally irregular and needing to be learned through some kind of visual imprinting process, or using the eyes like a camera, or however we talk about it. But in fact, that's a mistake to think about how we learn words like have. We learn them by matching speech and print, but there's more distance between the print and speech. And as we learn how the system works, it may take us a little more time or a little more cognitive effort to map the sounds to the print, but nevertheless, we do go through that process, and we do not bypass the phonological processor, even in learning words that are somewhat irregular in our English print system. So this is why many leading researchers who've studied the role of phonological processing and specifically phoneme awareness in learning to read and spell have offered these conclusions and statements, and you can find them in many, many things that they've written. Every level of word reading and spelling depends on phoneme awareness. An internal representation or mental image of the phonemes in words serves as, and this is my term, Velcro or parking spots to anchor or match the strings of phonemes that are in written words. And if phoneme awareness is incomplete, inaccurate, or out of focus, think of a fuzzy mental image, then anchoring or mapping print to speech will be adversely affected. In addition, not just the print to speech relationship, but also vocabulary learning itself may be adversely affected, so that individuals have trouble sorting out the differences between words that sound very much alike and connecting the right form of a word to its meaning in the lexicon. So we see errors, sometimes humorous, between words like relevant and reverent, syllabus and syllable, flush and flesh, prude and prune. And these are real substitutions that students or adults that I've known have made. So let's do a little test for me to make a point here. How many speech sounds are in each of these words? How many speech sounds would you say are in sod? How many are in no? And how many are in shrimp? Now, I will warn you that every time I have done this with a live audience, and I'm sorry we're not live today, but every time I've done this with a live audience, I have gotten what I would describe as a fairly wide range of responses to this simple question, or it would seem simple. Everyone talks about phoneme awareness as if it were simple. But let's look at the responses here. Sod has 3 phonemes, s, a, d, but it has 5 letters. And the word no, n, o, has 2 phonemes, but 4 letters. And the word shrimp has sh, r, e, m, p, 5 phonemes and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 letters. One of the studies that I did on teacher knowledge and how teachers thought about these words before they took some courses in what was and learned what was what, showed that the relationship between print knowledge and our ability to segment phonemes is affected by how many letters are in the printed word once we're already literate. So if we know what a word looks like in print, or we see a word in print and then are asked how many sounds are in the word, the typical mistake, now this was the rate of accuracy in my teacher group. It was about 2/3 of the teachers counted the number of phonemes in sod correctly, but the ones who did not count correctly, which was over 25%, overcounted the number of phonemes. Now, why would that be? Because the number of letters exceeds the number of phonemes and influenced the teacher's thinking about what was in the spoken word. The same thing with the word no, which you would think might be pretty straightforward, but we had less than 70% accurate on that and about 30% overcounting the number of phonemes in the word. But the picture changed with the word shrimp. And the word shrimp, we had less than 60% accuracy, but undercounting with those who were inaccurate, undercounting of the number of speech sounds in the word. And why would that be? Because maybe they were treating the consonant blends. This is my theory. They were teaching consonant blends as single speech sounds, perhaps. And that may be not only because it's hard to separate the sounds in a blend, and we know that from working with children, but also it may be that these teachers had been using an instructional program that taught them that a blend was one sound, which is inaccurate. So repeatedly in the mostly qualitative research that I've done, very simple, straightforward surveys of teacher knowledge, words that do not have a direct relationship between the number of letters in the word and the number of phonemes in the word are more problematic for teachers to count the number or identify the number of phonemes accurately. And so fix, for example, it has 4 phonemes, but 3 letters. The word quack, k-u-ack, 4 phonemes, but teachers tend to undercount because they treat the qu as one sound, which is inaccurate. String, they undercount the number of phonemes, but also tend to treat the NG as 2 phonemes rather than 1, and so forth. So why would we have such a high rate of disagreement on this very simple question, how many phonemes are in a spoken word? And it's very important to think about this for our own sake as professionals. What do we need to go through in order to become aware of the difference between phonemes and phonemic awareness instruction and phonics? Well, what I've found is that if we can read, and there are others who found this as well, Hollis Scarborough, Linnea Erie, if we can read, our knowledge of print influences our perceptions. So we think about the word in its printed form, but its printed form may be misleading and prevent us from either being able to explain explicitly what is in the spoken word, or prevent us from understanding where the student is coming from if they have spoken language but not good reading skill. And obviously the letters, especially in English, do not represent the phonemes directly. Phonemes also are hard to distinguish in the spoken word because they are smushed together in speech, and they're hard to separate cognitively. And finally, no one has taught us what the speech sound inventory is, unless we've been through a course that makes all this explicit, and or unless we've been through something like articulation training for being a professional singer or a professional actor, or we've been through comparative language instruction. So let's contemplate this a little bit more in depth. The fact of the elusive phoneme. The stream of speech is unsegmented. We do not go around speaking in separate speech sounds. Phonemes overlap and are co-articulated in spoken words. Co-articulation in turn causes subtle variations in how phonemes themselves are formed in the mouth. So this reality contributes to the difficulty of phoneme segmentation and ultimately the mental mapping of sounds to letters. And spectrographs are very useful tools because they show these variations in real time in terms of the frequencies that are coming out of our mouths as we form the sounds in words. So the next slide shows that initial I, the short I vowel, is different depending on the sounds that follow it in a spoken word. So thanks to Ann Whitney for recording these spectrographs. So we have Indian, igloo, and itch. And we tell kids that all of these start with I. But if you look at the difference between what's coming out of the mouth with Indian, the I flows into the following nasal sound, and in fact is nasalized. So it's a nasalized vowel. With igloo, the vowel is shorter in duration and raised up. And there's a division here between g and the stop and the o. And with itch, the vowel is a little less distorted, and there's a little bit of a stop between the vowel and the ch that follows it, or the ch includes a stop, a push of breath, and then the ch plosive sound. So it's a fiction in a way that we tell kids that all of these words start with I, because what they start with are variations of I. So an allophone is a variation of a phoneme that we think exists, at least in the abstract. And these variations are unconsciously produced, and they're produced according to an underlying system of phonological rules. None of us, I mean, when I say rules, these are unconscious, automatic. They affect our speech. And allophones, although they are slightly varying from the prototype, so we say there's such a thing as I, are still recognized as belonging to the category of sound that we identify as a phoneme. And obvious examples of this are the different D sounds in words like ladder, where it's a tongue flap, desk, where it's pretty straightforward, dress, where the D is puckered up or affricated, and educate, where it's also affricated, but it's voice, j. So we have dress and educated, both with affricated D sounds. And then with T, look at the difference. If we say table, that's pretty straightforward, but swept, we don't explode a push of air in that final sound. It's just a mouth form without that push of breath. And in the middle of little, it's a tongue flap. We don't say little. And tray, it's affricated T, again, before the R. And here's a concrete example of how this reality manifests itself in how kids think about what is in speech and how they try to use letters to show us what they think is in speech. And this is why I think it's so important for all of us to become sensitized to what kids are trying to do as they try to learn how to spell. But this first grader I often use as a writing sample for various things. In the word dig, the student perceived very clearly that the first sound was D and wrote it. But in dream, the student used the G, to represent the first sound in dream, which is quite clever. And the student obviously is paying attention to what his or her mouth is doing and selects the letter name that is closest to what that first sound seems to be, that affricated D. Here's another example of this phenomenon at work. This was a second grader, again, asked to write the ingredients and directions for making Rice Krispie treats, and he writes butter, butter, and here a stick of butter, let it melt. And I also want you to notice that stick is missing the inside consonant in a blend, and melt is missing the inside consonant in a blend, and we'll come back to this. But here's butter and butter. So the student is showing us what the sound feels like in his or her mouth, and it's a very good phonetic spelling in that sense. So let's ask then, well, what are the implications for teaching? Well, first of all, students' perceptions of the sounds in words may be driven by the surface characteristics of speech, because that is what they have to go on. The identity of some sounds is obscured by co-articulation of the sounds in spoken word. Letters are often a rough approximation of speech, so it doesn't make sense to advocate that we teach phoneme awareness by using letters, because letters are limited, letters are complex, and letters can be outright confusing if we use them to teach kids about phonemes. Therefore, students benefit from explicit instruction in what the phonemes are as speech entities and which ones are in a spoken word. So if we had that student in a class who was writing butter, B-U-D-E-R, it would be a mistake to do, as I used to do before I understood any of this, to say, now say it slowly. say butter. We should say butter. Now, don't slur your speech. Say the word correctly, butter. But if I said that as a teacher, I'd be reinforcing a fiction, which is that everybody says butter. The only people who say butter are pretty straight-laced British who do a lot less tongue flapping than we Americans do. So I would say to the student, oh, that's very good. That's what your mouth is doing. But you're going to have to learn to think of this sound in words like butter and water and better as t. You paid attention to what your mouth is doing, and that's very good. But we're going to have to think about the written word in a different way, because t is a chameleon sound. It can change a little bit depending on where it is in a word, and we just have to learn more about how words like this are actually spelled. Now, let's look for a minute at Linnea Erie's phase theory of reading and spelling development, which again is one of these anchor theories or reference points for understanding how to approach the issue of phoneme awareness with the students who are in front of us. One of the first questions we need to ask is, where are they in reading and spelling development, in order to determine what the goals of instruction should be. So if a student is in the pre-alphabetic stage and doesn't understand the alphabetic principle, the first thing is to make the student aware that letters stand for sounds in the first place, and to do very early phonemic awareness activities, which we'll talk about in a second. The second, if students are at this phase and able to extract a first sound from a spoken word, and for boy, write B, for make, MC, for will, the letter Y, which is W, for farm, to get a couple of the sounds there, and for think, to put the fricative F, which is like same category of phonemes, and to substitute G for K, a voiceless substitution. So he's in the ballpark, he's trying to segment the sounds. He's not being terribly successful, but is just at the point of being able to get first sounds and some last consonants in a single syllable word. This student needs more emphasis on simple phoneme segmentation and phoneme identity, so that he or she can move into the full alphabetic stage, in which any single syllable word can be segmented into its component sounds. So this student who's in the full alphabetic stage can write boy, make, will, farm, and think. Almost all the sounds are represented except for the nasal and think, and that's a very common omission because of the nasalized vowel causing us in speech to spread the nasal consonant between the vowel and the consonant that follows. Now, in order to get to the consolidated phase of accurate spelling, the student is going to have to also be able to do what Liberman, Shankweller, and Liberman talked about in the first quote I showed, which is to consciously engage in the manipulation of speech sounds. And that refers to the more complex phonemic awareness capacities of being able to compare words that are similar but may differ only in one sound, and to know that those words are different, and especially to compare words with different vowel sounds, to detect what those sounds are, and then relate the sounds to the spelling that has to be anchored in memory. So in order to address students at these different levels, we do different things. So if we have kids at the early phonological stage, moving from pre-alphabetic to alphabetic, partial alphabetic reading and writing, we might start with a syllable level task, it has a role here in helping the students sort of laying the table, as we say, setting the table to focus on the phoneme. We've seen many students who come into kindergarten who can't pay attention to language, who don't understand that language can be reflected upon, and we can play games with it. We can think about it. We can do things to it. It's an object that we can think about. So we might do syllable level deletion tasks and substitution tasks. And then we're going to start focusing on the first consonant of a single syllable word without consonant blends, and maybe deleting a first sound and saying what it is and saying what's left if we take that away. And then with a student who is moving from partial alphabetic to later alphabetic, we're going to up the ante. We're going to expect segmentation of simple words. We're going to be able to delete a final phoneme as well as an initial phoneme and say what's left. And then we're going to be able to substitute an initial phoneme in a word beginning with a blend, but the substitution of an inside phoneme in a blend becomes more demanding, more complex, and is typical of what we do with students who are moving from a later alphabetic phase into consolidated reading and writing, and have to be able to do this because learning print demands it, especially spelling. So here we have the task, we call them more complex. The term advanced phoneme awareness has gotten a bad name because of the arguments going on. So let's just call them more complex tasks that involve substitution and manipulation of sounds, substituting a medial vowel, deleting the inside phoneme in a blend, substituting the inside phoneme in a blend, substituting a final phoneme, deleting the internal phoneme in a final blend, and substituting the internal phoneme in a final blend. These are quite demanding. And yes, they do develop in as reading and spelling are developing, and there is a reciprocal relationship between being able to perform these tasks and being able to read and spell words of increasing complexity. Now, before we get into talking about instruction and some of the ins and outs of instruction beyond what I've already said, let's remind ourselves why it is important for everyone to understand the consonant phoneme chart. It helps us zero in on what sounds to teach to what kids when. So we need to understand, and if you who are listening to this haven't already learned this, I strongly encourage you to commit the consonant and vowel charts to memory. The chart is organized to assist us in understanding what is confusable for kids. So the stops may be confusable, especially the ones who share the same place and manner of articulation, except for voicing. So p and b, t and d, k and g. Then the three nasals. Then 8 fricatives plus, which we now put in the fricative category, 2 affricates that differ only in voicing, ch and j, the glides, the liquids. So the reason these phonemes are classified in these ways by position of articulation and by the manner of articulation is that they have overlapping features. They can be confused. Thinking of our student who substituted for not knowing how to spell and feeling that these sounds had properties in common. That wasn't a random error. That was a good stab in the right direction, right? And with the vowels, keep in mind that a vowel is not a letter. It's not the letters A, E, I, O, and U. And please stop teaching kids that a vowel is A, E, I, O, or U, because that's way too simplistic. A vowel is not a middle sound Although a vowel is the peak of a syllable, and you can't have a syllable without them, vowels are open speech sounds made with little obstruction of the tongue, lips, teeth, or air passage. Vowels are continuous and voiced. Every syllable has to have a vowel phoneme. There are 18 vowel phonemes in English plus schwa. Schwa is not technically a phoneme, but it's in the vowel chart. And vowels are what we sing. Okay, so we put the vowels of English into words in order to contrast them. The front vowels are E, I, A, E, A. The low open vowels are I, which also technically is a diphthong, but it belongs here because of the, we also call it a long vowel. I, and then the back rounded vowels, o, u, and the glided u, which is u. So there's a difference between boot and butte. Very important to notice that. We have 3 R controlled on the chart that I use for the sake of teaching spelling primarily, R, and or as single. We treat them, we tell them they are unitized sounds, but is definitely unitized, whereas or and R are halfway divided. And that's, you can treat it as you like. I'm not going to quibble. Oi and ow are the 2 diphthongs that don't fit in the array here. And so learning this is a really helpful aid in becoming very strategic and targeted in teaching phoneme awareness. So let's contemplate now back to, this is a 2nd grader. We use this writing sample for various things. This 2nd grader was referred to a learning specialist for a reading fluency problem back in the day when no one was teaching phoneme awareness other than a few enlightened souls. So here we have the word drive, missing the internal sound in a blend, taking a wild stab at the vowel and substituting a voiceless f for the final v sound in the word. Here we have bump, also not knowing the medial vowel, but leaving out the internal sound in the blend, in that nasal, final nasal blend. Here's another issue with a blend here, terrain. She got this one closet, and she got this one float. So perhaps the L blends were easier for her than the ones with as the 2nd sound, or the nasal blends. That could be because of the nature of the sounds involved here. So if we're to think about how to teach that student, that 2nd grade student, or the other 2nd grade student who wrote stick without and melt without ul, these students have a lot in common, which is they are ready for instruction that will heighten their awareness of the phonemes in consonant blends, especially the internal sounds, so that their spellings will be accurate, and also so they can distinguish words that are similar except for those internal sounds in the blends. Now, where does this fit? So I like to position or think about phoneme awareness instruction in the context of a whole code-based lesson, which takes between 30 and 45 minutes, depending on your students and your grade level and so on. But think about this as, think about phoneme awareness as having a role in preparing kids to learn the correspondence pattern or phonics pattern that is going to be taught in that lesson. That's really where it should be, rather than sort of a separate thing that happens at a different part of the day, or with a different handbook with exercises in it that has nothing to do with the specific lesson that you're teaching. So the aim here is to bring phoneme awareness instruction into closer contact with what we are teaching, why we are teaching it, and to whom we are teaching it. So for example, if the goal of our lesson was to teach kids to be aware of both sounds in a consonant blend, what would we do? We would design a warm-up activity where students had to focus on the internal sound in a blend before we taught a code-based lesson. So for example, we might say stick, say each sound and count each sound on your finger, stick. But a more demanding or complex task, which I think these second graders needed, given the kinds of spelling attempts that they were making, would be to do something like this, where you say scab, now say, now change k to ul. What's the new word? That is much more complex than just saying scab. It requires being able to say scab, but then to hold that in memory, take out the k, put in the ul, and reconstruct the word. Say scant, change k to ul. What do you get? Change, say clap, change ul, or say clap without k. What do you get? Say clap without ul. What do you get? Another way of getting at this, building the ability to mentally manipulate sounds when students need extra help with this, is to use tokens or colored blocks in a sound chaining activity. So we might, for example, say, show me lamb with different colors, am. Now, if that is lamb, show me clam. So we would add a different color there, am. Now, if that's clam, show me cram. And this is very demanding. The student would have to realize that the second sound had changed and we needed a different color here. Show me cam, then the student would have to realize that this one had been taken out. Now, why don't we just do this with letters, as some of my colleagues are advocating? Now, I think that's a real problem. And first of all, about 95% of the phonemic awareness studies that were included in the National Reading Panel's analysis used oral activities and/or tokens to teach phoneme awareness at first, and many then linked the phoneme awareness activities to instruction with letters. But that in itself meant that these were two different things, two different targets for instruction: phoneme awareness and awareness of letters and graphemes. Secondly, letters can add to the confusion that students are experiencing if the goal is phonemic awareness. If the goal is phonemic awareness, then adding letters as a means of instructing kids about the phonemes can muddy the waters, because some of the graphemes are complex, some of the graphemes are varied, and the students are, in essence, having to learn two things at once. They're having to learn the letters and the sounds. But if the foundational problem includes having fuzzy phonology, not paying attention to, and not being able to consciously reflect on and manipulate the sounds in speech, then the student is constantly turning to print to try to figure out what's what, when what's helpful is cultivating their ability to pay attention to sound, which they aren't easily able to do until we teach them and give them practice. Also, I see no basis in the research literature for saying that students should see the letters associated with the sounds rather than blank tokens during phoneme awareness instruction. To me, if the student needs to pay attention to speech, we use blank tokens at first to help the kids just focus on what their mouths are doing, what they're hearing, what they're seeing someone say, and cultivate that awareness in the phonological processing system so that there is an internal Velcro, or those parking spots exist for attaching the letters when they have to learn the print. So here's some big picture ideas for all of you. Remember that consonants and vowels are speech sounds. They are not letters. So in instruction, we need to say, this is a vowel letter, or this is a vowel sound. These two things are not the same. Sounds, or phonemes, are distinguished by place and manner of articulation, and we can use that knowledge and that reality to our advantage to target our instruction toward the sounds that kids may be confusing, and we can see which sounds they're confusing by looking at their spelling, their writing, their reading errors, and diagnostic surveys. Phonemes are articulatory gestures or mouth formations, as well as things that we say. So we can see them, we can feel them, and we can hear them. Consonants are closed sounds, vowels are open sounds. Two basic categories in phonology. Phonemes are elusive because they're buried in the continuous stream of speech. And we need to honor that reality and pay attention to the fact that it is not obvious when we say a spoken word what it is made up of. And I think I've illustrated that already. Phonemes are abstract categories of sound. And so what does this mean for instruction? Well, in order to sort of settle some of these arguments, this is what I think represents solid ground in phoneme awareness instruction. First of all, a few minutes daily is sufficient, and best practice is embedding phoneme awareness within a lesson framework where the actual content of the phoneme awareness activity or lesson has some relevance to the goals of the code-based instructional lesson plan. Show the students what the speech sounds are with sound cards and mouth pictures. I think that is good practice. There's some evidence. We need more evidence, but especially kids who are in the partial alphabetic stage, needing to acquire full phoneme awareness. Let's show them what is in the consonant inventory, what's in the vowel inventory. And then if we display this information, we can teach one sound at a time. We can certainly show what letter or letters or grapheme represents the sound that we're learning, but students have in front of them what the whole menu is that the teacher will be treating or going through as the lessons progress. We certainly want to use simple syllables first and complex syllables later. And we've seen over and over again that complex syllables represent a step up in terms of difficulty in both phoneme awareness and letter sound learning. Begin with first sound identification for kids who are just beginning to learn the alphabetic principle. Work with isolating that first sound and substituting at a very simple level, then move to the last sound and then the medial sound in simple syllables. Then include more complex phoneme awareness tasks for kids who need it. That's really important. no one, at least in my sphere of professional colleagues, has ever recommended that older kids be subject to a lot of work on advanced phoneme awareness if they are progressing perfectly well, and if they are already able to consolidate their word learning and move ahead in reading fluency. You may find there's a difference between what kids can do in reading and what they're doing in spelling, however. So if there are these sound omissions in spelling and confusions and so on, they may need more work than would be necessary for kids who otherwise are very good spellers. And teach the skill that fits the students and the lesson. So what did the National Reading Panel say, actually, 22 years ago? Well, at that time, there were 52 studies of that included phoneme awareness instruction. And the NRP report recommended that all children in K1 should receive instruction in phoneme awareness in addition to phonics. So no one was saying that phoneme awareness itself would magically translate into being able to read and spell, but it did support learning to read and spell, and phoneme awareness and phonics complemented one another to ensure that almost all kids would learn the foundational skills. Phoneme awareness and phonics are two distinct aspects of instruction, and both are critical for learning to read and spell, I would add. And since the NRP, there have still been more studies, even though the National Institutes of Health, for example, felt that the issue had been settled enough that the entire research program was moved toward understanding higher level language processes in reading and reading comprehension. Nevertheless, additional studies and additional publications, such as the Human Snowling book on that synthesized studies of reading, stated these studies converge with others in demonstrating that phoneme awareness and letter knowledge are critical foundations for the development of reading skills in children just entering school, children who have some ability to manipulate phonemes and spoken words when they enter school, and who have good knowledge of the sounds of letters make much better progress in learning to read than children for whom either of these skills is weak. Big picture. So to stay on course, let's all keep these things in mind. Phoneme awareness and phonics and decoding are distinct but complementary. Speech sounds have unique properties that are not represented by letters. Letters must be mapped to sounds, but phonemes are the reference point for mapping graphemes, which themselves have unique properties. The problems with phoneme awareness are a universal characteristic of dyslexia across languages, as it turns out. And each of these aspects of instruction is necessary to ensure that most kids make the best progress. The goal is reciprocity all the way along, linking phoneme awareness to decoding and spelling instruction with the aim of promoting progression to the consolidated phase of fluent word reading and fluent reading for comprehension. Gains are going to be more rapid and longer lasting when foundational skill instruction includes both, in addition to ample reading practice. So I want to thank everyone. Thanks for revisiting this topic. I hope we've put it to rest, and I hope you can, with confidence, go ahead and refine your practices, continue to refine your practices from what you know about both the structure of language, the nature of the difficulties that kids experience, and what you know from research on instruction. And I'd like to share this quote. Keep in mind that what we're all about is promoting literacy. Literacy is a bridge from misery to hope. Literacy is a platform for democratization and a vehicle for the promotion of cultural and national identity. For everyone, everywhere, literacy, along with education in general, is a basic human right. Literacy is, finally, the road to human progress. And that was from Kofi Annan, Secretary General of the United Nations. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much.